What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Thanks for clicking on another episode of Break the Silence. I am your host, Cyborg, and it is time for one of my favorite discussions. Which 5 NBA players have the most to gain from the playoffs this year? Legacy talk. I love talking about these kinds of things and making a list. So I got 5 players with 2 honorable mentions that we will discuss who can gain the most in their legacy from the playoffs this year. Up first, the number 1 spot, Nikola Jokic. He's a 3-time MVP. He has finished top 2 in MVP presumably 6 straight times, assuming he does this year. But at least 5 straight times he's been top 2 in the MVP and probably should have 5 or 6 MVPs at this point. He's an 8-time All-NBA player and won a championship a few years ago. Nikola Jokic, if he is able to lead his team to a second championship with Jamal Murray, a 1-time All-Star, as the second best player, Aaron Gordon, who's a great player, but those as his running mates, in my opinion, Nikola Jokic jumps into a top 10 NBA player of all time, jumping guys like Hakeem Olajuwon and really cementing his legacy and everything he's been able to accomplish in one of the greatest 6-year stretches we've ever seen. If he can cap that off with a second championship, I think Nikola Jokic has easily entered himself into some incredible conversations. You start looking at some of the best centers of all time. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaq, Hakeem Olajuwon, Nikola Jokic. Where does he rank in that? A championship will go a long way for Nikola Jokic in all of those conversations. Number 2, Shai Gilgeous Alexander. He is having potentially the best 2 guard seasons we've seen since Michael Jordan in back-to-back years. If he's able to cap it off with a second championship, a guy who's averaged over 30 points a game, a guy who won MVP last year and probably will win it this year based on the votes we've heard that have come out so far. A guy who won Finals MVP last year, and if he's able to repeat that, with incredible efficiency numbers, Shai Gilgeous Alexander will skyrocket up everyone's rankings with 2 MVPs, 2 championships, and a guy who's probably not slowing down with his work ethic and the depth and youth of the Oklahoma City Thunder. They should be a problem for a long time, but a championship would be massive. When you look at shooting guards, if you consider Shai Gilgeous Alexander a shooting guard, he potentially jumps a guy like Dwayne Wade for your 3rd best shooting guard of all time after, Michael Jordan, after Kobe Bryant. Does he jump a guy like Dwayne Wade? He would have more MVPs. He would have more finals MVPs. He'd have one last championship, but Wade was the 2nd best player in 2 of those titles. Shai Gilgeous Alexander winning a title would be huge for his legacy. Number 3, the young fella, Victor Wembanyama. If he is able to advance his team to the NBA Finals and win a championship, he will validate every conversation that was had about this young man coming out of France and into the NBA. A guy that we expected to be in top 10 conversations of all time. And if he is able to deliver a championship this early, he will have surpassed some of the greatest players we've ever seen in their early stages of their career as far as winning goes. It took LeBron James and Michael Jordan, I believe, 7 and 8 years to win an NBA championship. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar struggled to win titles when he was on the Milwaukee Bucks and really started to win when he's on the Lakers. So if a guy like Wemby can really get started at a young age, he is putting himself way ahead of the curve, especially with what he does on the defensive end of the court, and presumably we'd expect him to win MVPs in the future, but Victor Wembanyama winning a championship would be massive for his legacy. Number 4 is kind of 2 guys, but I'm going to focus on one, the Jays, Jalen Brown and Jayson Tatum. We're going to focus on Jayson Tatum because of coming back from that Achilles injury, and a guy who was pretty heavily scrutinized for being corny, a guy who's not overly loved in the media. But you've started to see some of that narrative change. His ability to come back from a terrible Achilles injury that we all saw in the playoffs last year, 298 days later be playing in an NBA basketball game and playing at a high level. If he's able to come back in for the Boston Celtics and help them deliver that championship, his 2nd one, potentially winning a Finals MVP. I think Jayson Tatum, a guy who's 5 times All NBA, which is incredible if you think about it. A guy who's 5 times All NBA. I believe 4 of those are first team. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 4 of them are first team All NBA. if he's able to deliver a second championship, he becomes one of the greatest Celtics of all time, even though he's, kind of on his way already. And he kind of when you talk about top 10 lists, he's a guy who's a little disrespected, but if he's able to win his second championship, a finals MVP, and come back next season and be that Jayson Tatum that we all, love and have grown so accustomed to, that would be massive for his legacy. And Jaylen Brown, the way that he's led his team this season, he already has a finals MVP, a guy who will probably be first team All-NBA this year. If he delivers a championship, those two guys will be massive for both of them. My fifth and final person on this list before my honorable mentions is Jalen Brunson. Now, this is a spot that I struggled with because there's so many guys that obviously would benefit from a championship, but I wanted to keep it a little bit more realistic as to who could win a title. Now, obviously, a guy like Cade Cunningham would benefit massively from winning a championship, but Jalen Brunson would officially become the greatest player in New York Knicks history. He'd be a 3-time All-NBA player, and you look at the Knicks, they've had really great players throughout their franchise, but they've struggled at times to deliver those championships. So you look at guys like Patrick Ewing, never won an NBA title. I believe John Starks didn't win a title. Walt Frazier might have, but I'm drawing a blank on that. But Jalen Brunson, I think, would become the greatest Knick or the second greatest Knick in NBA, in the history of their franchise. And that's just massive when you're talking about a brand like the New York Knicks that's so synonymous with the NBA, the Garden, all those sorts of things. A player that we did not expect to have this kind of career. If he's able to deliver a championship to New York, I think he cements his name in the record books, and his legacy is something we would talk about for a very long time. Honorable mentions: James Harden. If the Cleveland Cavaliers are able to break through and win an NBA championship, both Donovan Mitchell and James Harden would benefit greatly from this. But James Harden has been, at the forefront of a lot of what I would consider a little bit unfair conversations towards his playoff woes. He has had really incredible playoff moments and really tough playoff moments, but he ran up against some absolute juggernaut teams in those Golden State Warriors teams, the teams with Steph, the teams with KD, and he just always came a little short of winning that championship. So if he was able to deliver a ring, he takes his name off, best player to never win a championship. He solidifies the fact that he won an MVP and, puts himself in, speaking of shooting guards, again, very rarefied air is one of the best shooting guards in NBA history. And the final person that can benefit from this playoffs the most is Adam Silver, a guy who I think has done a terrible job this regular season. The way that he's reacted to how gambling companies want him to, the tanking conversations, I don't think he's handled any of it well. But if these playoffs slap, if these playoffs are as good as they could potentially be, some of these play-in games we've already seen have been incredible. If these playoffs deliver, Adam Silver will very much save himself in the public eye and buy himself some grace, because the NBA, there's so much talk about ratings, about tanking, about all these different issues, the style of play. People don't like watching the games, people sitting out, load management, all these different things. If the playoffs are incredible, the NBA reminds us why we love it so much, and Adam Silver would benefit greatly from that. That is my list of the most to gain these NBA playoffs. I would love to hear if you would like to add anyone to this, or if you disagree with any of my takes. If you love the NBA, make sure you subscribe to the pod. We are going to grind NBA content this postseason, and I can't wait for it. Appreciate y'all watching. Cyborg out.